If a dog trained for war refuses to let go, it's not instinct anymore. It's a warning. The night had settled quietly over the edge of Blackridge Forest, the kind of quiet that didn't feel peaceful, only empty, as if the world had paused and forgotten to breathe. Ethan Cole stood on the worn wooden porch of his small cabin, one hand resting on the chipped railing, the other loosely holding the leash that should have been slack by now. But it wasn't. Rex was pulling again, not playfully, not impatiently, but with a steady, insistent force that tightened with every second, his broad frame leaning forward, muscles locked, ears raised high into the still air. "Easy," Ethan muttered, his voice low, worn from years of speaking only when necessary. The German shepherd didn't respond. He didn't even look back. His amber eyes were fixed on the tree line ahead, where the darkness gathered thicker than the rest of the night, as if the woods themselves were holding something just out of sight. Ethan exhaled slowly, his breath faint in the cooling air. He had seen that posture before. Years ago. Different terrain, different danger, but the same tension, the same quiet urgency. Rex had been trained to detect things most men couldn't, things buried, hidden, waiting. And he never pulled like this unless something was wrong. The leash jerked again, sharper this time. Ethan's grip tightened instinctively. "Rex." This time, there was an edge in his voice. Still nothing. No bark. No whine. Just that forward pull, as if the dog had already made a decision and was simply waiting for Ethan to catch up. The wind, which had whispered faintly through the pines just moments ago, had stopped. Completely. Ethan noticed it without realizing he had. No rustling leaves. No distant hum of insects. Just a stillness so complete it pressed against his ears. Rex stepped off the gravel path and onto the narrow dirt trail leading into the woods, not hesitating, not slowing. The leash stretched taut between them. Ethan hesitated, just for a second. His eyes scanned the dark line of trees, tall and unmoving, their branches tangled like silhouettes against a clouded sky. He had lived here long enough to know the forest's moods. This wasn't one of them. This felt different. Rex pulled again, harder now. Not panicked. Certain. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. He had learned a long time ago not to ignore that kind of certainty. "All right," he said quietly, more to himself than the dog. "I'm coming." His boots pressed into the damp earth as he stepped off the porch and followed. The moment they crossed into the woods, the air changed. Cooler. Heavier. The scent of pine and soil carried something else beneath it, something faint and metallic that didn't belong. Rex moved faster now, guiding, not dragging, but leaving no room for hesitation. Branches brushed against Ethan's jacket as they passed, the sound sharper in the silence than it should have been. He tried to listen, to find anything familiar, but there was nothing. No birds shifting in their nests. No distant creak. Just the quiet. And Rex's steady movement ahead. After a few minutes, Ethan realized something that made him slow slightly, his eyes narrowing. They weren't following any trail he recognized. Rex veered left, deeper into a part of the forest Ethan rarely entered, where the ground grew uneven and the trees stood closer together, their trunks dark and thick like pillars holding up something unseen. "Where are you taking me, boy?" he murmured, though he already knew the answer wouldn't come in words. Rex suddenly stopped. Not gradually. Completely. The leash went slack as his body froze mid-step, ears angled forward, head slightly lowered. Ethan stepped up beside him, his breath steady but slower now, his senses sharpening the way they used to when something fell off before he could explain why. He followed the dog's gaze. At first, he saw nothing. Just a small clearing where the trees opened just enough for pale moonlight to touch the ground. Then his eyes adjusted. The earth there wasn't untouched. It had been disturbed. The soil darker, uneven, as if something had once been buried or uncovered. Rex let out a low, quiet sound. Not quite a growl, not quite a warning, something older than both. Ethan felt it then. Not fear. Not yet. Just the unmistakable sense that whatever had drawn them here wasn't random, and it wasn't finished. Rex did not move from the edge of the clearing, his body still as stone, but his focus sharpened in a way Ethan had learned to trust long before words could explain it. Ethan stepped forward slowly, boots sinking slightly into the softer patch of ground, the damp soil giving just enough under his weight to feel wrong, as if it had been turned over not long ago, though the surface had already begun to settle. He crouched, reaching down with a gloved hand, brushing the top layer aside. The earth beneath was darker, packed tighter in some places, looser in others, like something had disturbed it from below rather than above. He paused, listening again, but the silence held. It was not the kind of silence that comforted. It was the kind that waited. Rex shifted his weight slightly, and then stepped forward, placing one paw carefully near the center of the disturbed patch, his claws pressing lightly into the soil. He lowered his head and inhaled slowly, deeply, then lifted it again, ears tilting as if tracking something too faint for human senses. Ethan watched him closely. "You smell something," he said under his breath, though Rex did not need the confirmation. The dog's tail remained low, not tucked in fear, but steady, controlled, focused. That was always worse. Ethan straightened slightly and scanned the clearing again, this time more carefully. The trees around them stood closer than he had first realized, their trunks forming a loose circle, branches high above weaving together just enough to block out most of the sky. The moonlight that reached the ground did not spread evenly. It pooled in thin patches, leaving other areas in shadow. And right at the edge of one of those shadows, something caught his eye. A line, too straight to be natural. He took a step toward it, brushing past a low branch that scraped softly against his jacket. The sound felt louder than it should have been. Everything did. He knelt again, this time near the edge of the clearing, and used his hand to clear away leaves and loose dirt. The shape became clearer with each motion. Metal, cold and dull beneath the soil, worn by time, but not broken. A straight edge, slightly raised, forming a corner. Ethan exhaled slowly, his breath steady but deeper now. "That is not supposed to be here," he murmured. Rex stepped closer, standing just behind him, his presence firm, almost protective, but not pulling back, not warning him away. That was new. Usually, when something posed immediate danger, Rex would block, push, insist on distance. But this felt different, like he wanted Ethan to see it. Carefully, Ethan brushed more dirt aside, revealing a larger section. A flat surface, a seam running across it, a handle, half buried, rusted but intact. He stopped moving for a moment, his hand resting lightly on the exposed metal. It was colder than the air, as if it had been holding on to something beneath the surface for a long time. The faint metallic scent in the air grew stronger the more the surface was revealed, mixing with the damp earth in a way that felt unnatural. Ethan's mind worked through possibilities, but none of them settled comfortably. This was not a random piece of debris. It was placed, built, meant to be found, or meant to be hidden. Rex let out another low sound, softer this time, almost like a signal of recognition rather than alarm. Ethan glanced back at him, studying the dog's posture, the tension in his shoulders, the unwavering focus in his eyes. "You have seen something like this before, have you not?" he said quietly. Rex did not answer, but he did not need to. Ethan turned back to the metal surface and gripped the handle firmly. For a moment, he hesitated, not out of fear, but out of understanding. Whatever was beneath this was not part of the forest. It did not belong to the quiet, to the trees, to the natural rhythm of this place. It had been placed here with intention, and intentions, Ethan had learned, always left something behind. He pulled. The handle resisted at first, as if the earth itself was reluctant to let go, then gave slowly with a dull, dragging sound that seemed to travel farther than it should have in the stillness. The seam widened, just enough to reveal darkness beneath. Not empty darkness. Something deeper. Something that felt contained. A faint current of colder air rose from the opening, brushing against Ethan's face, carrying with it a scent that was not just metal now, but something older, something closed off for a long time. Rex stepped back half a pace, not retreating, but adjusting, his ears angling forward sharply. Ethan did not move to open it further. Not yet. He simply stared into the narrow gap, listening. At first, there was nothing. Then, just beneath the silence, so faint it almost slipped away before it could be noticed, came a sound. Not loud, not sudden, just steady, a soft, repeating vibration, like something below was still running, still moving, still active. The sound did not belong to the forest. Ethan held his breath without realizing it, his body leaning slightly closer to the narrow opening, as if his senses could sharpen enough to understand what logic could not. The vibration was faint, almost delicate, but it repeated with a consistency that made his chest tighten in quiet recognition. Not random, not natural, measured. Rex shifted again behind him, his nails pressing lightly into the soil, not scratching, not restless, just anchoring himself as if the ground beneath them had suddenly become less certain. Ethan slowly lowered himself to one knee, bringing his ear closer to the gap, careful not to widen it further yet. The cold air rising from below brushed against his face again, steady and dry, carrying that same metallic trace layered with something older, something sealed away from light and time. The sound grew clearer the closer he listened. A low pulse, then silence, then again, a pause between each one that was almost exact. His mind moved before he could stop it, counting without thinking, the way it used to when waiting for patterns that meant the difference between safety and something far worse. 1, 2, 3. The next pulse came. His jaw tightened slightly. The interval was too precise to ignore. Rex let out a soft, controlled exhale, almost like a breath held too long. Ethan glanced back at him. The dog's ears were forward, his gaze fixed not on the opening, but slightly off to the side, as if tracking something deeper than sound alone. "You hear it too," Ethan said quietly, not expecting an answer, only acknowledging what was already understood between them. He reached forward again and pushed the metal surface a little farther. The hinge groaned softly, a tired sound that seemed to echo longer than it should have in the stillness. The opening widened just enough to reveal more than darkness. There was structure beneath. Not earth, not rock, something built. The faint outline of a narrow stairwell leading down, its edges lined with concrete, worn but intact. Ethan's eyes adjusted slowly. The light from above barely reached past the first few steps, but it was enough to confirm what he was seeing. This was not recent. The materials, the shape, the design, it carried a weight of age, something constructed with purpose long ago and then left behind. Or hidden. The sound came again. Closer now. Not louder, but more defined, like something mechanical still operating beneath layers of silence. Ethan felt a subtle shift in the air, a slight movement that did not match the stillness above. It came from below, rising in faint currents that touched his skin with a coolness that felt controlled rather than natural. Rex stepped closer again, lowering his head slightly, his nose hovering just above the edge of the opening. He did not bark. He did not growl. He simply listened, every part of him focused with a discipline that came from training and something deeper than training. Ethan studied him for a moment. Rex was not afraid. That much was clear. But he was alert in a way that carried weight, as if he understood more than he could communicate. "You knew this was here," Ethan murmured, more statement than question. The dog's tail gave a single, slow movement, not wagging, not relaxed, just acknowledging presence. Ethan turned back to the stairwell. The darkness below did not feel empty. It felt occupied, not by something visible, but by something that continued, something that had not stopped when the rest of the world above had moved on. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small flashlight, its metal surface cool against his palm. For a second, he hesitated, his thumb resting on the switch. Not fear, not quite, just the quiet understanding that once light entered that space, whatever existed there would no longer remain hidden. The forest behind him stayed silent, as if it had no interest in what lay beneath. As if this place did not belong to it at all. Ethan flicked the light on. A narrow beam cut through the darkness, revealing the first few steps clearly now. Dust settled thick along the edges, undisturbed for what looked like years. But not everything was covered. There were faint marks along the center of the steps, subtle, worn patterns that suggested something had moved there. Not recently, but not forgotten either. The beam stretched farther down, disappearing into a bend where the stairwell turned out of sight. The sound came again, just as steady as before. Ethan swallowed slowly, the motion small but deliberate. "That is still running," he said under his breath. Rex lifted his head slightly at the words, ears sharpening even more. Ethan shifted his weight forward, placing one boot carefully on the first step. The concrete felt solid beneath him, colder than the air above, as if the ground itself held a memory of what lay below. He paused there, just at the threshold, listening one more time. The pulse answered him again from the darkness. Waiting, not calling, not warning, just continuing. The first step carried a weight Ethan did not expect, not from the concrete itself, but from the shift it created, as if the moment his boot pressed down, something unseen had taken notice of his presence. He paused there, 1 foot inside, 1 foot still in the world above, the beam of his flashlight steady but narrow, cutting through the dark just enough to reveal the path ahead while leaving everything else untouched. The air changed again the deeper he leaned in, losing the faint scent of pine from the forest and replacing it entirely with that cold, metallic trace, layered now with something else, something dry and still, like a place sealed away from time. Rex did not hesitate. The dog stepped forward beside him, placing his paws carefully on the first step, then the second, his movements slow and deliberate, every muscle controlled. He did not rush. He never rushed when something mattered. Ethan followed, each step measured, the soft echo of his boots against the concrete sounding too loud in the enclosed space. The opening behind them remained visible for now, a thin frame of pale moonlight that felt distant already, like something they had stepped away from rather than down from. The stairwell descended about 10 feet before turning sharply to the right, the walls narrowing slightly, the ceiling low enough that Ethan instinctively lowered his head as he moved. The beam of his flashlight swept across the surface of the walls, revealing faint lines and markings etched into the concrete, not decorative, not random, but functional. Measurements. Numbers worn down by time, but still present enough to suggest this place had once been used with precision. The sound pulsed again, clearer now, its rhythm unchanged, its presence steady. Ethan counted without thinking. The interval remained exact. It was not weakening. It was not fading. It was continuing, as if it had never stopped. Rex paused at the turn, his body angled slightly toward the corner, ears forward, head tilted just enough to listen beyond what Ethan could hear. His breathing remained calm, controlled, but there was a subtle tension in the way he held himself. Not fear, but readiness. Ethan stepped beside him and slowly turned the corner, the beam of light moving first before the rest of him followed. The space opened slightly beyond the bend, not into a large room, but into a narrow corridor that extended farther than the light could fully reach. The floor was smoother here, less dust settled along the center, the same faint pattern of disturbance visible again, subtle but consistent, as if something had passed through this space more than once, though not recently enough to leave fresh marks. The walls carried more of the same etched lines, along with occasional metal fixtures mounted at even intervals, small, circular housings that might once have held lights or sensors, now dark and silent. All except one. Farther down the corridor, just at the edge of where the flashlight's beam began to fade, a faint glow flickered. Not bright, not steady, just enough to confirm that something ahead was still drawing power, still functioning in a way that should not have been possible after so much time. Ethan stopped without realizing it, his body instinctively stilling as his eyes focused on that distant point of light. Rex moved half a step in front of him, not blocking, but positioning himself slightly ahead, his posture aligned with the direction of the corridor, as if he already knew where this path led. The pulse came again, this time echoing faintly through the structure around them, no longer just something heard, but something felt, a subtle vibration that traveled through the floor and into the bones of the space itself. Ethan exhaled slowly, the sound barely audible. This place was not abandoned, he said quietly, his voice steady but low. The words settled into the silence without resistance. Rex did not look back. His focus remained forward, locked onto something beyond the visible, something deeper within the corridor where the light flickered and the pulse continued. Ethan adjusted his grip on the flashlight and took another step forward, the beam stretching farther now, revealing more of the passage, more of the marks, more of the subtle signs that this place had a purpose once, and perhaps still did. As they moved deeper, the glow ahead sharpened slightly, no longer just a flicker but a pattern, a faint cycle of light dimming and returning, synchronized in a way that matched the rhythm of the pulse. Ethan felt it then, not as fear, but as a quiet realization settling into place. Whatever was below them was not just running. It was responding, not loudly, not obviously, but in a way that suggested awareness, even if it was only mechanical, even if it was only a system continuing its function. Rex slowed his pace, his head lowering slightly, his ears angling forward with even greater precision. The corridor stretched on, silent except for the pulse and the faint hum beneath it. And for the first time since stepping below, Ethan understood something with complete clarity. They were not the first to find this place, and they might not be alone in knowing it existed. The farther they moved, the more the air seemed to settle into a pattern of its own, no longer shifting naturally but holding a steady weight, as if the space itself had been designed to remain unchanged. Ethan kept his pace slow, each step deliberate, the beam of his flashlight sweeping just enough to stay ahead of them while leaving the edges of the corridor in shadow. The faint glow ahead pulsed again, matching the rhythm beneath his feet, and for a moment it felt less like a distant source of light and more like a signal repeating itself with quiet persistence. Rex stopped once more, this time without warning, his body stiffening in a way that made Ethan halt instantly beside him. The dog's ears angled sharply to the left, not toward the corridor ahead, but toward one of the walls. Ethan followed his gaze and turned the flashlight slowly, letting the beam trace along the concrete until it caught something subtle but unmistakable. A seam, not like the one above in the clearing, but thinner, cleaner, almost invisible unless the light hit it at the right angle. Ethan stepped closer, his fingers brushing lightly against the surface. The wall felt solid, but the seam ran vertically for nearly 6 feet, then curved slightly near the top, forming a shape too precise to be accidental. Another door, he murmured, more to confirm the thought than to question it. Rex lowered his head, placing his nose near the seam, inhaling once, then pulling back slightly, as if something about it demanded distance, not fear, but caution. The pulse came again, stronger here, not louder in sound but more present, like the vibration had found a clearer path through the structure. Ethan pressed his palm flat against the wall. It responded, not with movement, but with a faint echo beneath the surface, a hollow space hidden just beyond the concrete. He moved his hand along the seam, searching, and then found it. A small indentation, no larger than a coin, set into the wall at chest height. It was smooth, untouched by dust, as if something had made contact with it not long ago, or as if it had been designed to resist time entirely. Ethan hesitated only for a second before pressing it. The response was immediate. A low, muted click echoed through the corridor, followed by a soft mechanical shift that traveled upward along the seam. The wall did not open all at once. It separated slowly, a narrow line widening just enough to reveal darkness behind it, deeper and more contained than the corridor itself. Rex stepped back half a pace, his posture tightening, his attention fixed on the opening. Ethan angled the flashlight toward the gap. The beam slipped inside, revealing a smaller chamber beyond, its walls lined with metal panels instead of concrete, surfaces smoother, colder, and still faintly reflective despite the dust that clung to them. The air that moved out from the opening was different. Not just cold, but controlled, filtered, carrying that metallic scent more strongly now, mixed with something faintly electrical, like the trace of old machinery still holding a charge. Ethan pushed the door wider, the movement steady, the sound minimal, as if the mechanism had been built to operate quietly no matter how much time had passed. Inside, the chamber extended no more than 10 feet across, a compact space that felt intentional, not abandoned storage, but a place designed for a specific purpose. Along the far wall, partially illuminated by the fading beam of his flashlight, stood a structure that made him pause completely. It was not large, not imposing, but unmistakably active. A panel, mounted at an angle, its surface embedded with small indicators that glowed faintly, cycling through dim pulses of light that matched the rhythm they had been following since the clearing above. The hum here was stronger, not overwhelming, but present enough to feel through the air itself. Ethan stepped inside slowly, the change in flooring subtle beneath his boots, smoother, more refined than the corridor. Rex followed but stayed close to the entrance, his body angled outward slightly, as if keeping one part of his awareness anchored to the path they had come from. Ethan moved closer to the panel, the light revealing more detail with each step. Rows of markings, faded labels, and beneath them, a single display that flickered with intermittent clarity. Numbers appeared for a brief second, then dimmed, then returned again in the same steady cycle. He narrowed his eyes, focusing on the sequence. It was not random. It repeated, The same pattern, over and over, as if tracking something that had not yet reached its end. Ethan felt a quiet tension settle in his chest, not from fear, but from understanding. This was not a forgotten place. It was a system, and it was still waiting for something to happen. The steady pulse did not change, but something about it felt closer now, as if the room itself had narrowed the distance between cause and effect. Ethan stood in front of the panel, his eyes tracking the dim sequence of numbers as they flickered in and out, never fully stable, never completely gone. Each cycle returned to the same pattern, the same alignment, like a clock that had no intention of reaching zero. He leaned in slightly, the beam of his flashlight catching more detail across the surface. The markings around the display were faded but deliberate, small engravings pressed into the metal rather than painted, designed to last longer than anything written. Coordinates. That was the first thing his mind settled on. Not random digits. Not measurements. Location data. He exhaled slowly, his breath faint in the controlled air. This is tracking something, he said under his breath, his voice low but certain. Behind him, Rex shifted his stance, not moving away, but turning his head slightly toward the corridor, one ear angled back as if dividing his attention between what was in front of them and whatever remained behind. Ethan noticed it immediately. The dog was not just focused on the panel anymore. He was listening for something else, something that had not been there before. Ethan straightened, his body still but alert, and listened. At first, there was only the familiar rhythm of the pulse, the faint hum beneath it, and the quiet breath of the room. Then, beneath all of it, something changed. Not a sound exactly, more like a shift in the pattern. The pulse came again, but this time, there was a delay. A fraction of a second longer than before. Ethan's brow tightened slightly as his mind registered it. The next cycle followed, and the timing corrected itself, returning to the precise interval it had held from the beginning. But the disruption had happened, and Rex had noticed it too. The dog let out a low, controlled exhale, his posture tightening just enough to signal awareness. Ethan turned back to the panel, his focus sharper now. The numbers flickered again, but this time they held a fraction longer before dimming. Enough for him to catch more of the sequence. He did not recognize the location immediately, but the format was clear. Latitude, longitude, something specific, something real. His hand hovered near the surface of the panel, not touching it, but close enough to feel the faint warmth radiating from within. "You are still sending something," he murmured, the words barely louder than the hum around him. The idea settled into place with quiet certainty. This was not just a system waiting for input. It was transmitting, or receiving, or both. The air shifted again, subtly but unmistakably, as if a current had passed through the room without wind to carry it. Ethan felt it along his arms, a faint change in pressure that did not belong to the stillness. Rex turned his head fully toward the corridor now, his ears locking forward, his body angled in that direction with renewed focus. This time, there was no hesitation in his stance, no uncertainty, just readiness. Ethan followed his gaze, the beam of his flashlight cutting back toward the doorway they had entered. The corridor beyond remained empty, the faint glow from the distant light still pulsing in rhythm. But something about it felt different now. Not visibly, not clearly, just altered. The silence beyond the chamber no longer felt passive. It felt occupied by something unseen, something that had shifted when they entered this room. Ethan stepped back slowly, his movement controlled, his attention divided between the panel and the corridor. "We are not alone down here," he said quietly, not as a conclusion drawn from fear, but from observation. The pulse answered again, steady as ever, but now it carried a weight that had not been there before. Not just a signal, not just a system, something reacting, something aware of presence, even if only in the most mechanical sense. Rex moved one step forward, toward the doorway, then stopped, his body forming a silent barrier between Ethan and whatever lay beyond. His tail remained low, his posture firm, his focus absolute. Ethan understood the message without needing to question it. Whatever had changed had not come from this room. It had come from deeper within the corridor. He took one last glance at the panel, committing the pattern to memory, the numbers, the rhythm, the faint light that refused to fade completely. Then he turned fully toward the doorway, his grip tightening slightly on the flashlight. The corridor waited. Quiet. Still. but no longer empty in the way it had been before. And for the first time since stepping beneath the forest, Ethan felt the unmistakable sense that whatever this place had been built to track might already be closer than it should be. The corridor did not change, but the feeling within it did, settling into something heavier, something aware in a way that could not be measured but could not be ignored. Ethan stepped out of the chamber slowly, his boots meeting the smoother concrete with controlled precision, the beam of his flashlight steady as it swept forward. Rex moved ahead of him by half a step, not pulling this time, but guiding with quiet intention, his body aligned with the length of the corridor, his ears fixed forward as if listening to something just beyond the reach of sound. The faint glow down the hall continued its cycle, dimming and returning in perfect rhythm. But now Ethan noticed something he had not before. It was not the light itself. It was the space between each pulse. It felt shorter. He slowed his breathing, focusing, counting again without realizing it. The interval had shifted, not dramatically, not enough to be obvious, but enough to confirm what his instincts had already begun to tell him. The pattern was changing. Rex stopped again, this time near a section of the corridor where the walls narrowed slightly, the ceiling lowering just enough to create a subtle pressure in the air. He stood perfectly still, his head slightly raised, nostrils flaring as he drew in the scent around them. Then, slowly, he turned his head toward the floor. Ethan followed. The movement of the flashlight beamed downward, letting the light trace across the surface beneath them. At first, it looked the same as the rest. Smooth, worn, quiet. But then the beam caught a difference. A faint line, running across the width of the corridor, almost invisible unless the light hit it directly. Ethan crouched, bringing the light closer, his eyes narrowing as he studied it. The line was not just a crack. It was deliberate, a seam. And unlike the others, it was not covered in dust. It was clean, recently disturbed, or designed to remain untouched. Rex lowered his head further, placing one paw just before the line, but not crossing it. His body stiffened, not in fear, but in recognition. Ethan felt it too, a subtle shift in the air, like a boundary that could not be seen but could be sensed. He reached out slowly, his fingers hovering just above the seam, then lightly brushing against it. The surface was colder than the surrounding floor, and for a brief moment, he felt a faint vibration beneath his fingertips. Not the same pulse as before, something sharper, more immediate. He pulled his hand back slightly, his instincts tightening. This is not just structure, he murmured quietly. It is a threshold. Rex let out a low sound, softer than a growl, but deeper, a tone Ethan had only heard a handful of times, always when something ahead was unknown but significant. The pulse came again, and this time, it felt closer, not louder, but nearer, as if the source had shifted position or as if they had moved into its range. Ethan straightened slowly, his eyes scanning the corridor ahead. The glow at the far end flickered again, but now there was something else within it. A second rhythm, subtle, almost hidden within the first. His breath slowed, his focus narrowing as he tried to separate the patterns. The primary pulse remained steady, but beneath it, something new moved, not matching the timing, not aligned, but present. Rex took a careful step back from the seam, then looked up at Ethan, his amber eyes sharp, alert, carrying a message that needed no translation. Do not rush forward. Ethan nodded faintly, more to himself than to the dog, his mind working through the possibilities with quiet precision. Whatever this place had been built to track, it was not alone anymore, or it had reached a point where the system itself was adjusting. He shifted his weight slightly, angling the flashlight once more toward the seam, then beyond it, letting the beam stretch into the deeper part of the corridor. The light did not reveal movement. It did not reveal figures or shapes, but it revealed something else. A faint reflection, not from the walls, not from any visible surface, but from something just beyond the line, something that caught the light for a fraction of a second and then was gone. Ethan felt his chest tighten, not from fear, but from certainty. Something crossed this, he said quietly, his voice steady but lower now. The corridor remained silent. The pulse continued. The glow flickered, but the stillness had changed. It no longer felt like a place waiting to be discovered. It felt like a place that had already noticed them. Rex did not move forward again. He stood his ground, his posture firm, his attention locked on the unseen space beyond the seam. And Ethan understood, with a clarity that settled deep and unshakable. Whatever was ahead was no longer just something they were following. It was something that could follow back. The air beyond the seam did not move, yet it carried a presence that pressed against Ethan's awareness in a way no visible threat ever had. He remained still for a moment longer, his flashlight steady, its beam resting just beyond the line, as if crossing it too quickly might disturb something that had not yet revealed itself. Rex held his position, his body angled slightly forward but grounded, every instinct balanced between caution and purpose. Ethan exhaled slowly, then shifted his weight and stepped over the seam. The moment his boot crossed the line, the sensation changed. It was subtle but unmistakable. The air felt denser, not heavier, but more controlled, like stepping into a space where every element had been measured and contained. Rex followed immediately, not hesitating now, but staying close, his shoulder nearly aligned with Ethan's leg. The corridor beyond the seam extended. Another 20 feet before widening into a larger chamber, the faint glow that had guided them now clearer, pulsing from multiple points along the walls. Small fixtures, embedded evenly, each emitting a dim, synchronized light that rose and fell like a slow breath. Ethan moved forward carefully, the beam of his flashlight sweeping across the expanding space. The floor here was different, no longer worn in the same patterns as before, but smooth and untouched, as if it had been preserved rather than used. The walls curved slightly inward, creating a shape that felt less like a hallway and more like a contained system, something designed to hold or monitor rather than simply connect. The pulse continued, steady but layered now with that second rhythm, faint but persistent, moving just beneath the surface of the primary signal. Rex slowed as they entered the chamber, his steps lighter, his head lowering slightly as he scanned the space with precise attention. He was not searching randomly. He was tracking something. Ethan noticed it in the way the dog's focus shifted, not toward the light, not toward the walls, but toward the center of the room. He followed that line of attention and raised the flashlight. At first, it revealed nothing unusual. Just open space, a circular floor, the faint glow reflecting softly across its surface. But then the beam caught something subtle. A distortion, not a shadow, not a solid object. Something that bent the light for a fraction of a second before settling back into stillness. Ethan froze. The beam steadied, his grip tightening slightly, his breathing controlled but slower now. He adjusted the angle, moving the light again across the same spot. The distortion returned, faint but real, like heat rising from asphalt on a summer road, except there was no heat here. Only that controlled, cold air. Rex let out a low sound, softer than before, almost questioning, but his body did not retreat. Instead, he shifted slightly to the side, creating a clearer line between Ethan and the center of the chamber. His ears remained forward, his focus unwavering. Ethan took one slow step closer, his boots making almost no sound against the smooth surface. The pulse beneath his feet responded again, steady but closer now, as if the source had aligned with their position. The distortion sharpened slightly, just enough for him to understand that it was not random. It had shape, not fully defined, not something his eyes could follow completely, but structured in a way that suggested form. Something present, but not fully visible. Ethan felt a quiet tension settle deeper in his chest. Not panic, not fear, but recognition that what stood before him did not belong to the natural world above. "You see it," he whispered, not as a question, but as confirmation. Rex's stance tightened, his body lowering slightly, ready but controlled, his attention locked onto that same shifting space. The light pulsed again along the walls, synchronized with the rhythm beneath them, and for a brief moment, the distortion reacted. Not by moving away, not by disappearing, but by shifting slightly toward the light, as if acknowledging its presence. Ethan's eyes narrowed, his mind racing through possibilities that refused to settle into anything certain. This was not a machine he could understand, not a structure he could map. It was something that existed within the system, responding to it, moving with it. The second rhythm grew clearer, no longer hidden beneath the first, but layered beside it, independent, deliberate. And as Ethan stood there, the realization came with quiet certainty. settling deeper than any sound or movement. Whatever this place had been tracking had reached the center, and it was no longer just being observed. It was observing back. The distortion did not retreat when Ethan stood his ground, and it did not advance in any way that could be measured, yet something about it changed the longer he remained there, as if presence itself was a form of interaction. The chamber held its quiet, the lights along the walls continuing their slow pulse, rising and falling like a breath that did not belong to anything living, yet refused to stop. Ethan kept the beam of his flashlight steady, not forcing it closer, not pulling it away, allowing it to rest just at the edge of that shifting space. Rex did not move from his position, but his posture adjusted in subtle ways, his weight shifting from one paw to the other with controlled precision, his ears catching changes that Ethan could only feel. The second rhythm grew clearer again, no longer faint, no longer hidden, but existing alongside the original pulse with its own quiet intent. Ethan listened carefully, his mind tracing both patterns at once, separating them, understanding that one belonged to the system and the other did not. He lowered the flashlight slightly, letting the beam widen across the floor, catching the reflection of the chamber's lights, and for a brief moment, the distortion revealed more than it had before. Not shape, not detail, but boundary. It occupied a space, a defined center, something that held position rather than drifting. Ethan felt his breath slow even further, not from fear, but from focus. "You are not random," he said quietly, his voice calm, measured, carrying no challenge, no demand. Just observation. The pulse answered again, steady as ever, but the second rhythm shifted in response, not breaking its pattern, but adjusting its timing by a fraction, enough to confirm what he already understood. This was not just a reaction to light or movement. It was responding to presence. Rex stepped forward half a pace, his head lowering slightly, his gaze fixed directly at the center of the distortion. He did not bark. He did not growl. Instead, he exhaled slowly, a controlled release of breath that carried through the chamber in a way that felt intentional. The distortion responded again, not moving, but tightening, as if the space it occupied had drawn inward for a brief second before settling back into place. Ethan noticed it immediately. "It is aware," he said, more to confirm the thought than to express it. He glanced briefly toward Rex, then back to the center of the room. The numbers on the panel behind them flickered faintly in his memory, the coordinates repeating, the system tracking something that had now reached its destination. Or perhaps had always been here, waiting to be found. Ethan took one slow step closer, careful, deliberate, his boots silent against the smooth floor. The distortion sharpened slightly again, the light bending just enough to outline its presence without revealing its nature. He stopped just short of the center, his hand lowering instinctively to his side, not reaching out, not provoking, simply existing within the same space. The air remained cold, controlled, but now it carried something else beneath it, something almost imperceptible, like a shift in pressure that did not belong to the environment. The second rhythm aligned briefly with the first, just for a single cycle, and in that moment, the chamber felt still in a way it had not been before, as if both patterns had synchronized long enough to acknowledge each other. Then it broke apart again, returning to two separate signals, one steady, one independent. Ethan exhaled slowly, his eyes never leaving the center of the room. "You were not waiting for a signal," he said quietly. "You were waiting for someone to find you." Rex held his position, his body steady, his focus unwavering, but there was no fear in him, only attention, only readiness. The chamber continued its quiet cycle, the lights dimming and returning, the pulse repeating without end. And the distortion remained, not fading, not leaving, simply present. Ethan understood then, not through explanation, but through the absence of it. This was not something that would end with discovery. It was something that would remain, long after the moment passed, long after the lights above the forest returned, long after the world outside continued, as if nothing had changed. He slowly stepped back, not turning away, not breaking his focus, just creating distance without losing connection. Rex mirrored the movement, staying aligned with him, his body still angled toward the center. The second rhythm softened slightly, not disappearing, but settling into something quieter, something that no longer pushed against the edges of the space. Ethan reached the threshold of the chamber and paused, his gaze lingering for one last moment. The distortion held its place, unchanged, yet undeniably aware of his presence. Then he turned, guiding Rex back toward the corridor, the beam of his flashlight shifting away from the center, leaving the chamber to its quiet, pulsing rhythm. As they moved back through the corridor, crossing the seam once more, Ethan felt the air change again, lighter, less contained, but the memory of that presence remained with him, clear and unshaken. Above them, the forest waited in silence, untouched by what lay beneath. But Ethan knew something with quiet certainty as he reached the first step and looked back into the darkness below. Some places are not meant to be understood, only found. And sometimes, being found is exactly what they were waiting for.